I'm glad for the opportunity to share some of my memories of that fateful day. 16th January was a Friday afternoon in 2015. I called it a day of infamy last year, and it's still very much etched in my memory, and I have not in any way, it has not diminished its critical importance in the life of our country since then. I call it a day of infamy because the then Labour administration had used the Parliament, which is a key pillar of our democracy, in a way that no one could have dreamt they would do. And they did so in order to hijack, to manipulate our system, and in which they felt, manage to win an election to hold on to power. It's a question where they were prepared to do anything to hold on to power at all costs. Now, what happened? I had been appointed to the Constituency Boundaries Commission back in August 2012, the beginning of August, 1st, 2nd August 2012. It's a constitutional position where in every term the Governor General will appoint 5 individuals to this commission that is mandated by the Constitution to say whether we should change the boundaries on which people vote for representatives in St. Kitts and Nevis, or have them remain the same. The Constituency Boundaries Commission deals with the number of boundaries, a number of constituencies in St. Kitts and also in Nevis, but also how they should each be aligned. And these were done by getting equal or near equal inhabitants in each constituency. So that if, for instance, you had boundaries, a population of 34,900 inhabitants in St. Kitts, that figure divided by 8 constituencies would give you an average number of inhabitants that should be in each constituency. Or there are some 5 factors that can be taken, the Constitution states can be taken into account, that can allow you to deviate from that average. Well, the average we found was about 4,373 inhabitants per constituency. But because you might have sparsely populated rural areas, there could be less. There could be geographic considerations. For instance, you would not necessarily want to put Old Road with Phillips's, although they're relatively close, because there is a mountain range in between. So that geographic range allows for different things. Then you might have administrative divisions, parishes, or whatever it is, that may come into effect. But these are not strong indicators today in St. Kitts and Nevis. In the old days, you had what were called parish vestries that acted as local governments in small areas. So there are different factors that can be used that may allow you to move away from this average number of inhabitants. And so the commission had met first in 2013. We produced a report, the first boundaries report, but there were some strong objections to that. and the matter was taken to court. It was struck down by Justice Ramdani on the 31st of July 2014. And then the then Labour administration proceeded to do a second boundary report. And so by the time we got to January 2015, this is the background to what happened. And I remember clearly on Friday the 16th of January 2015, we had a notice for a meeting that was to begin at 1 o'clock. It did not begin until 2 o'clock. The meeting went to 3:30 when a draft report had been produced by the chairman, Mr. Peter Jenkins, and required the members of the commission to sign the report to agree with it. And I objected to signing the report, as did Premier Amory, who also sat on the report with me, from members on the opposition benches. Then there were two representatives in the commission from the government benches, and these would have been then Deputy Prime Minister Asen Martin and Chairman of the Labour Party, Marcella Liebert. And they agreed to sign. And Peter Jenkins, signed along with them. So there were 3 who thought the report was okay. 2 of us did not. But the majority would have carried it. My objection, as was Premier Amory's objection, had been that we had seen for the very first time, 3 days earlier, maps that actually described what the boundaries were. We had been talking in a vacuum, that's what it is, whereas there had been a request for maps for quite some time. No maps had been produced until the 13th of January, as were descriptions as to how the actual boundaries were. So we had an objection. The other members of the commission felt that we had discussed it and we should have known, but we are in a vacuum. And I often like to give the example, for instance, of why maps in this case would have been critical to an understanding of boundary changes. For instance, between Constituency number 1, East Bastille, and Constituency number 2, Central Bastille, the demarcation, the line dividing the two, was a straight line up 4th Street, the middle of 4th Street, up Victoria Road, past the Bastille High School to the Moravian Church. And it says, continuing in a straight line to the parish boundary. Now, that was the discussion. And where does the straight line go to? In 1989, when that same description was made, once you get to the airport, everything else was sugarcane fields. Nobody lived there. In 2015, you had New Road, you had Pine Gardens, you had a whole set of new settlements, residences. Where would that line go? Who lived on what side of the line? Who was in Constitution 1? Who was in Constitution number 2? The same consideration could be taken with the line between Constitution number 2 and Constitution number 3. A straight line up Wigley Avenue from OTI all the way up to the cemetery, through the middle of the cemetery, past Government House, that I said, continuing in a straight line to the parish boundary. With the parish boundary, where does it go? Is Shadwell on one side or the other side? How many people? How do you get to know what the average number of inhabitants were? And this reflected a major problem that I had very early, that we should have used enumeration district data, small area data, that is used in the same census. Those small area data, that area, was based on maps. And we needed to see those maps, that data, which was struck down, was never provided for us. we saw the maps for the first time at the 13th January 2015. And so it was an issue that we refused to sign. And so at 3:30, the other three members of the commission signed. At this time, there was no knowledge, there had been no information, there had been no notice that things would evolve after that.
So what happened next?
As we left the chamber, which was on the 3rd floor of government headquarters, we noticed activity on the 2nd floor outside the parliament. And at 4:05, I was served with a notice by a police officer saying that Parliament was to be at 4:15.
So you had 10 minutes notice?
10 minutes notice. The other members of Parliament were not there. The other members of the opposition were not there. They had no notice. So that at 4:15, Parliament started when other members were all over the place and were rushing to come to Parliament to see what was going on. That's why I call it a devil for me. It was a hijack. There was a hijacking of the Parliament by the Labour Party regime, who should know better. In our Westminster system, there are very clear rules as to how Parliament should be conducted. And in a drive, in a thirst to hold on to power, the then government treated our citizens to the most egregious breach of our Constitution. And that's why I call it a day of infamy. It was something that we hope would never happen again, should never happen again in our country. And it's something that we should condemn the then members of the Labour Party for having to attempt to carry out, to try to surreptitiously, to sneakily try to manipulate the Parliament so that they could get a resolution passed to accept this report so that they could have an unfair, what they thought would be an advantage going into an election in 2015, in February 2015. And it's something that will forever be etched in my memory, one that I will never forget, and one for which the people of St. Kitts and Nevis should condemn the Labour Party for even thinking of or attempting to carry out by breaking the rules, all the rules of decency of the Constitution to obtain an outcome. Well, we know the history stands on our side. They were not successful, and I think our people were appalled. Many of their supporters were appalled. Many of their supporters could not stand to see what had happened, and they sided with Team Unity during the elections and voted them out of office. As our Prime Minister would say, to God be the glory. I think that there is a breath of fresh air in the country on so many different levels. I think that there is a sense from all sorts of interest groups that they can speak openly, they criticize the government, they feel as though they should get responses and answers in a way in which were unheard of during the Douglas regime, during the time of the Douglas regime. We have press conferences regularly, the Prime Minister does, at which the press comes and asks any and all questions and get answers. We have talk radio that castigates ministers, castigates the government, And so there is a sense of openness and accountability. We in Team Unity had promised that we would seek to uphold two pillars during our term, this term, and if people are satisfied beyond. That is that we would have a program to restore democracy, and also that we'd have a prosperity agenda. We have taken time to gain control of the economy. We have taken time to build a very solid economic performance, and the last 22, 23 months, we feel we have been very successful in producing a good economic plan that is unfolding. We can go through questions of no VAT on food and medicine and the money that's in the economy. We have done significant work in developing the cruise industry, building on what was there before, and we are now ready to unleash a second cruise spear. The events last Thursday, for instance, show that how much is needed. We have major hotel plants coming on stream, one or two this year. And so economically, we have done exceedingly well. We are now in a position to begin to roll out our good governance agenda, and this clearly has to do with questions of tenure of office of the Prime Minister. We pledged that if you had a Prime Minister who was there for too long, that you had the potential for going off the tracks. And so we say that a Prime Minister should not be in office for more than 2 terms. We have had a first reading of that bill. We will be coming shortly with to have the Parliament debate and pass that. There are some questions as to whether we would want to have it as a bill or even look at it from a constitutional standpoint. But this is a major plank and promise that we have made to the people, and that within the first quarter of this year we will deal with that. We have also made a promise to have a Freedom of Information Act and its companion Data Privacy Act. And the question was that it's also a major plank of good governance, people having access to information. We have had a first reading of this bill, but there were some challenges, and still are some challenges, in being able to have the supporting infrastructure to provide data, information, when people request it. Because once you are in a position to request data, you can't tell the citizen that it's not available and so on. So there's an infrastructure that is required to be put in place. And we will be coming to the people shortly to describe some of these issues. But we feel, again, in the first quarter, this is another bill, another act that will go before the Parliament to give our citizens the sense that this government is open, it's accountable to the people. We are not afraid to let people see and ask questions, see what we do, and so on. And the third pillar of this good governance agenda, which is also very critical, has one to do with integrity in public life, in which public officers should be open to scrutiny so that they are kept within the straight and narrow, that there is no challenge to how they conduct their affairs, that there is no dipping, as it was, into the government's coffers, that their position in government does not allow them to make profit, get advantages that other citizens should not have. And so it's a very important plank that we would want to ensure that we bring these pieces of legislation to Parliament, to the public, in the first quarter of this year. I think that we are there for 2 years. We understand that we have made promises to the people, and we intend to keep these promises. And I think that we have done a very good job to date with unveiling and making good of a number of promises already, and we will continue to do so. Yes, I think that the people have voted for Team Unity administration. I think that we are committed to ensure that the faith that the electorate place in us, that we will live up to those expectations. I know that some feel we're not moving fast enough, that they would like to have everything at once, but we are deliberate in what we do. We are very careful, and to date, I would venture to say that we have made no major, if any, mistakes in our conduct of the business, in representing our people in the international community, in relations to our friends and allies, or for anyone for that matter. We believe that we have been careful and prudent in our management of our financial affairs, and we think that we put in St. Nevis on a path to which we can gain respectability once again in how we conduct our affairs. The Day of Infamy, the 16th of January, was one in which put a blot, a stain on our country, here among our people, throughout the region and in the international community, in what happened that day. And we feel that we will live up to the expectations of our people and deliver a good quality of life, and one in which our people can live, work, play in the best country in the world.